All right, good morning, everyone. So, if you're at home today, this is the video that you're going to be watching. We're going to go over just a little bit more in depth about loops, the two different types of loops that your AP exam covers, and one other type that is not covered. However, it may be helpful in the long run. So, just a couple of things. I know that loops were covered on your summer work very, very briefly, so that's why I wanted to take the time to go through it a little bit more in detail and kind of explain the difference between the two and when they might be appropriate to use, as well as talk about the syntax of them, what each part means, and how it can be useful, and some mistakes, I should say, some mistakes that we want to try and avoid, and some common things where if you do run into some trouble, kind of like first place to check kind of things. So to start, the first type of loop we're going to talk about is called a for loop. This is also called a definite loop. And the reason is that it typically has a set number of times that it will run. Now, for loops, based on the project that you guys just turned in, as well as some of the coding bat stuff and other exercises we've done in class, I apologize if you can hear the motorcycle going by my house right now, are something that we've worked with a little bit, so I'm not going to take a whole lot of time to go through them, but just to go through some of the basics here, right? We have for, and then in parentheses here, we have our conditions, right? So our first step here, this int I equals 0, is the initialization of my loop value that's going to hold how many times this loop is run. An important thing is that I does not need to start at 0, right? So starting at 0 here is not a hard and fast thing. It can start wherever you want, right? Sometimes maybe you'll get a problem where you have to, sum up all of the numbers between 100 and 1,000. Well, I'd probably start my loop at 100 then, right? So the starting point is very problem dependent here, right? So whatever you're trying to solve, your starting point is going to be problem dependent. Your second part of your loop here, right? Let's just say, I is less than 10. This is always going to be a Boolean statement. Right? It's always going to be the condition that the loop checks before it runs. Always 100% of the time, it will check that to then see if it can execute whatever contents are between the two curly braces. And then the last part is just your increment or decrement, right? Whether I'm adding to I, subtracting from I. The other important thing is that this does not have to be only I++. Right? This can be anything. Maybe you want to add up all of the even numbers between 0 and 100. So it could be something like I plus equals 2. It could be I plus equals 3. It could be anything you want it to be. Again, problem dependent. Depending on what you're solving, depending on what you're trying to do, that may change. Right? So I think another thing that's important to look at is the order in which these things go through, right? So let's say I have another for loop here. Let's just say I'm going to create, some pseudo code here. Oops, my stylus freaked out. Int sum equals 0. Let's say I want to sum up all of the numbers between 3 and, 47. Right, and so in here, I can say sum plus equals I. Perfect, right? Now, a couple of things to understand here. One, the order that things go in, right? 1 starts here, right? It's always going to check what is I currently, right? Or what is I initialized to be. Then it's going to go here, right? What is I? Is I less than or equal to this current thing? If 1 and 2 are both true, then it executes 3, right? Then it will execute whatever contents exist in your loop, and then it will jump to step 4 on the outside, right? So the order is kind of weird, right? We We figure out what is the loop variable. We check it against that second condition. Then if both of those things work out, right, if my Boolean condition is true, I execute whatever exists in the contents here of this loop. It might be more than one line. In this case, it's only one. And then it'll go to your increment or decrement, right? Another important thing here is that this step 2 here, this second condition, can be more than one statement. It can be an or, it can be an and, it can be a bunch of things. So I could have something for like for int I equals 0. And if you remember some of the coding bat things that you had to do, like the mix string, I could have something like I is less than a dot length if a was a string, and I is less than b dot length. There we go. My stylus does not like me right now. There we go. Right over here. There we go. So you can have, and then I++ again, and then whatever exists here. You can have multiple conditions existing in this second one, right? Just joining them with an and or an or. It's not locked into only being a single thing. This may be useful more so in class than on the AP exam. Typically on the AP exam, you're only going to see a condition like this first one up here. However, stuff like this down here may make your life a little bit easier in class. One more important thing about for loops and where people tend to run into some issues sometimes, right? Because a couple of the common mistakes is just people forget the increment operator, right? They only go up by 1 when they want to go up by 2. Or where I have in here underlined in pink, the I is less than with the and less than both string lengths. People forget that they can do that. The other important thing is that if you have a for loop and you don't put curly braces, all right, I is less than 10, I++. If you don't put curly braces, right, if I don't put this, and let's say I put 2 lines of code here, right? Let's say let's pretend I created some integer sum and then I want to print. Sum. Right now, right, because I don't have curly braces, that's okay. But understand that no curly braces will act like this, and it will close before the print statement. So it will only execute the first line of code if I don't put curly braces. So if I get rid of these, the only thing the for loop will do is this. So it'll run through the entire for loop, and then it will print at the end once the loop is done running, right? So that's one mistake, is that people forget curly braces, so their loop is only doing one thing, when in fact inside of their loop they want to actually do multiple things, right? Maybe they want to add to some, and then, you know, they have a conditional where if I is even, you want to skip by 1, but if I is odd, you want to skip by 3, right? Something like that. Right, so those are some mistakes to watch out for with for loops. Going forward, the other type of loop that is most common and tested on your AP exam is a while loop. Now, I know we talked a little bit about while loops because we had a multiple choice question in class, but most importantly, the way that we write a while loop is literally the word while, and then in parentheses here, we have some sort of Boolean condition. And then we have the contents of our loop. These are called indefinite loops. And you can probably guess why, is that we don't know how many times this loop is going to execute, right? Maybe that condition is, you know, while I have odd numbers, keep summing them up, and then something changes inside. Maybe it's, you know, maybe I'm looking for, you know, the 50th prime number, right? So I'm going to create an integer that keeps track of how many prime numbers I've found so far. And while, you know, that counter is less than 50, keep running, keep going, right? So the idea with a while loop is that we're going to use this most often when I don't know how long I need something to run, right? I don't know my stopping point. I don't know that I'm going to only need to run through, all the numbers from 1 to 100, right? When I don't know that upper limit, that's when a while loop can be really, really helpful, right? The place where people make big mistakes with while loops is they forget to reset this condition, and then you get yourself stuck in an infinite loop, right? If you have a Boolean statement as your condition, but then the contents of your loop don't ever change it, right? When you find what you're looking for, that runs you into a problem because you're just going to run for forever. So the contents of your loop should change that condition to be when you found what you're looking for, make sure you stop. Because otherwise, what this will do is it'll run the contents of the loop, right? So it'll run through whatever is in here, and when it's done, it's going to go back and check that condition again. Is this condition still true? Okay, run through and then go back, and you'll get stuck literally in this endless loop where if your thing never changes and you press run on your code and it runs for 3 hours and nothing happens, we might have run into an issue. One thing that's very, very important here is that it checks that Boolean condition before running. Right? It will check that Boolean condition before running. So if it's false to start with, your loop will never run. Right? So if you want your loop to run at least one time, we have a separate loop for that. So the only two loops that are tested on your AP exam are the for loop that we have here and the while loop. These are the only two that are explicitly tested on your AP exam. There's one more type of loop which is very similar, and it's called a do-while loop. And the biggest difference, right, in the way that we write this, we just literally use the word do, brackets, do something, while some Boolean condition. And then the semicolon goes at the end here. The biggest difference between a do-while loop and a while loop is that these contents will run first, whatever's in here, and then it will check the condition. So a do-while loop is guaranteed to run at least once. And that's the biggest difference. A do-while loop will run at least one time and then check the condition, whereas a while loop will check the condition first and then decide, based on the status of this Boolean statement here, whether or not it's going to run. So if you know you want your loop to run at least one time, I would suggest using a do-while loop. Understand it's very, very important here. The do-while loop is not explicitly tested on your AP exam. However, you can still use it in your free response answers. You can use this on projects in class and other assignments. That's totally fine. But just know, you won't see a multiple choice question about it. You won't see anything on the free response where you'll be asked to use it. Everything on the exam can be done with a for loop or a while loop. Right? So what I want you guys to do now, right? I left a few assignments up on Classroom. There's 2 of them. One is a good example of when to use a for loop. One is a good example of when you should use a while loop. So I want you guys to try both of those. I want you to submit your code so I can give you some feedback. And then I will see you all tomorrow. Have a wonderful day, everyone. See you later.